Welcome back to Tocqueville Talks. I'm Brent Nelson, and I'm director of the Tocqueville Center for the Study of Democracy and Society at Furman. It's a bright spring Furman day, and I'm here with my co-host, Beth Larive. Are you as cheery as I am because of the sun and the warmth?
Who could it be? This is amazing. It smells like flowers outside.
Yeah.
Sorry, Northerners.
Yeah, exactly. Well, by the time this is aired, it might be spring in the Midwest as well. But yeah, we are here to start a series of podcasts on the global economy. We had an event this month on globalization and trade, all the things that are dividing us right now. We kind of learned that the global system looks fairly stable on the surface, although with war in the Middle East, things are a little bit less stable than they were even 2 weeks ago. But we know that trade is still flowing and alliances are still flowing, institutions remain in place. But underneath, there are these pressures that are building, and we saw that very much play out in our series on globalization. So we had 3 people, and they came from very different backgrounds and different positions on the spectrum, and we're going to hear from these 3 over the next 3 weeks. So the first one is Josef Braml, and he's a German and brought a different perspective. Right, Beth?
Yes, a German who we discovered, we both have I'm also, not originally from America, from Canada, but we both have a shared love of certain Americanisms. Like we both experienced the college football game and how absolutely American. And then it feels like you see, usually an F-16 flyover or something, and you're like, now I understand.
And a flag as big as a football field.
Exactly.
Right. That is shocking even to Americans sometimes.
So he was up in Minnesota at St. Cloud doing some work up there when he first came over. So that was fun. We talked about that a bit. But yeah, so we talked about, and basically we stepped back and looked at what's actually changing in the global order right now. And how that affects things students care about right now as well, like economic stability, job opportunities, and global risk. We also talked a bit about Tocqueville's warning about soft despotism. So we're excited to share this conversation about global finance, institutions, the European Union, America, think tanks make a brief appearance.
And Josef Braml is, he's a think tank guy. He even wrote a dissertation on think tanks.
Exactly.
But he is the European director for the Trilateral Commission, which is not at the heart of a conspiracy theory, although some people think it is. But it really it arose in the 1970s because people saw the rise of Japan, and Europe and America were all both competing and cooperating in the West. And so this organization was created in the United States, but has a European and an Asian element as well. And Josef is part of the European side. So it was a really interesting discussion. And Beth, here's your interview.
Josef Braml, thank you for being here with us today at the Tocqueville Center.
Thank you, Beth, for having me here.
So I first wanted to get a sense of what first drew you into studying U.S. and Europe relations, and at what point did you realize this wasn't just diplomacy, wasn't just talking, there's real power in how the world actually works?
Actually, I started out as a French specialist. That's what I did at the university, and thank God I stepped into ISEC, or ISEC as it is called here, meeting, and I applied for an internship, and it turned out to be in St. Cloud, Minnesota.
Oh, really? Oh.
And that changed my life. I found people very welcoming. I mean, there was lots of European, especially German heritage. And my language skills would develop on a slower pace. At that time, English in America was too fast. But in the Midwest, they take it easier. So
Exactly.
I had an easier time than I would have had in New York or the West Coast for that matter. So I had a wonderful year, and I went home and I wanted to do a master thesis on how the internet would change politics and the world. But in Germany, the internet wasn't really a commodity yet. So
You were ahead of your time.
They were not ready yet. They were still talking about TV and if Nixon only had shaved and, and all that. Said, okay, but they figured the guy is somehow modern. So down the corner is another new professor who comes from Berkeley, and he's doing some work on think tanks. And I said, what is that? Think tanks? Yeah, it's social scientists who apply their findings and this and that. I said, oh, that sounds interesting. So I met with the guy, and so I did a master thesis on think tanks, and I'm a hands-on guy. So I decided to go to America to see a think tank. And, Cato looked into it, and they were really very libertarian, more than I could be on this earth. So at that time, I appreciate that a little more than I did at that time. Heritage, they really wanted to see your true colors, and I was more of a middle of the road scholar. That was my self-perception, and so I tried Brookings, and they didn't let me in through the front door, so I took the back door and really made the case I want to do stuff with you, and they gave me a chance. Did 1, 2, 3 internships at that time. And later on, then I won a scholarship with the American Political Science Association on the Hill, and then went back to Brookings and did a comparative analysis of German and U.S. think tanks. And that was my starting point into the think tank world. Now I've been working in different think tanks, and I'm still close to the U.S., still trying to figure out what drives you guys.
Could you say just your thesis on the American versus German think tanks? I'm very curious about that. What was the comparison?
Institutions matter. My mentor was Kent Weaver. Institutions matter was Rockman. They wrote the Bible. Kent, as I understood it, did his PhD on the Canadian system. And so there's a huge difference between a parliamentary system that's party-driven and the checks and balance system where parties don't mean a lot. It's the same terminology, but it's like root beer. When I came to Minnesota first time, they offered me a root beer. I was expecting beer, but it wasn't really what I was expecting. So the same terminology, but different meaning. So the signifiant, signifié, to do linguistics was different. And so that's a problem. Many people from Germany look at the U.S. and think political parties, but that doesn't mean a lot. I mean, Trump pushed away both parties, created his own movement. You can do that in a checks and balance system. So for think tanks, there are not many obstacles to really influence a political game. You do agenda setting, media, you have 535 individual entrepreneurs on Capitol Hill, on the House side, 435 on the Senate, and then you have the administration, and then you have this and that, and many ways to influence. In the German parliamentary system, doesn't make that much sense to really go that public. You need to go to the gatekeepers, the caucus head and all those guys. But when you influence them, your ideas may fly higher than in the U.S. system, where 99% is meant for, grandstanding and the wastebasket in the end. That's what I realized up on the Hill. I was working on the banking committee during my APSA years, so I saw it from the demand side. And then later on, I was at the Brookings Institution and did comparative analysis of think tanks. And another important thing is how you view government.
Okay.
So I realized in Germany, think tanks want to be independent from the private sector, because private money kind of corrupts you. That's the idea, and government money gives you independence. ask the same question in the U.S.,
Yeah.
especially post-'80s. You want to be independent from government, and private money gives you that independence. That question may have been answered differently in the 60s, where government was flying high, but then you had the early 70s, where you had stagflation, Vietnam and all that, and all those whiz kids who thought they could go beyond polarization, we would call it today, or ideology, by just being technocratic. It all fell apart, and you would go back to full-scale, partisanship. New think tanks were set up, like the Heritage Foundation. They were advocacy tanks, and now you have advocacy tanks on both sides, and not much in the middle, and that kind of reflects what this country is all about. And I'm really worried about America right now. When I was working up on the Hill, it wasn't a sin to talk to Republicans. I was working for a Democrat and vice versa. And now people don't want to see with the other camp, and it's two different sides of the aisle, and I understand there's even civil war now in the Republican camp.
Well, that brings me to the next question I want to ask you, which is in your latest book, World to Come, and your argument that the post-war order is breaking down. So if you could just say more about what that order was and how you see it specifically breaking down, and how you see that in terms like, a sort of regular person would understand, like, what does this mean for our lives? Mm-hmm. How is this going to affect us in terms of jobs or security or travel?
Yeah. First of all, full disclosure, Matt Burrows from the US and I wrote this book, and Matt has been working for the CIA, it's one of the 18 agencies, and then was for the NIC, National Intelligence Council, and he was setting up strategic foresight. So he was not only doing that, he was building that, looking into the future. So he's very good at doing scenarios. I've done that before. Okay. And so for both of us, it was clear that Trump would be reelected, and that the way we still saw it, or some saw it, especially in Europe, we could go back to the old days, are over. So for us, Trump was not the main cause. He was just a symptom of something deeper that started way before. We would even date it to 2007, 2008, the financial crisis, when the banks were too big to be failed, and they were bailed out, while normal Americans were left to themselves and their misery, their drugs, their opioids, their suicides. And, there's a direct line to Trump's first victory and 2007, 2008, when people thought we had it. This globalization doesn't work for us. Not all boats would rise, as people would have it at that time. We trade with each other, and jobs were moving to China and overseas. Full story told, it wasn't only competitors. It has been also automation, but it's politically easier to blame the Chinese and others, and that was the time. So it was clear that we move from one extreme, free markets, government wasn't supposed to intervene, deregulation. When I was on the banking committee, we deregulated the good Democrats with the Republicans. So the Glass-Steagall in between the investment banking and the credit was torn down. It was set up for a good reason after the 30s of the big crash to prevent disaster, and you push it down and you had disaster 2007, 2008. So too much deregulation, laissez-faire, let the markets do everything. And, there was a counter movement. Now government is full in, and that's what we mean. It's not the Washington consensus any longer. Government stays out, and the market would take care of it and would make others trade like us, China and the Russians, and then they would become democratic. Right. That was the kumbaya philosophy at that time, and we didn't have the end of history as Francis Fukuyama would foresee it. So game over in the parlance of younger people. Mm-hmm. We won, and the rest of the world will be just like us. It wasn't the end of history, but an irony of history. So it wasn't China that was adopting the American model. Now you have America adopting the Chinese model, which is called mercantilism. Full government in there, so you don't have free trade flows, free financial flows, free human capital flows as we had it. And data flows. It's now government controlling, manipulating. So the economy is not the goal any longer. It's an instrument, a weapon for geostrategic ends. The end is to contain China, to make sure America remains number one. China has been underestimated for too long. People didn't take that seriously, and now America has kind of a second Sputnik moment. They're afraid the Chinese would take over, as they were afraid the Soviets would take over when they shot their first artificial thing in the orbit, and then they beefed up, and now they're afraid they're losing the game, the high-end game with artificial intelligence, big data, and quantum computing, and there's a good chance the Chinese may be ahead. And here's a huge problem. Matt and I am afraid that due to this rivalry, which causes already costs, it's called deglobalization, it's called inflation, and many more. So this is already a bad world, could turn into an ugly world, and that would be a war. It won't be a regional war over Taiwan or whatever. It would be a world war. It would be a nuclear world war. And to avoid that, our first book, before that, we offered a way out of there, Globalization 2.0. But right now, we are not talking about globalization. It's still about deglobalization. So it's controlling streams. It's reshoring, friendshoring, as the Bidens would have had it now, with Trump is de-risking and this and that. But in the end, it's economic warfare. It's using the economy as a weapon, and that really all bets are open. And we are not sure whether America will win this new Cold War 2.0 against China. China is in a better situation on many fronts, especially on trade, and that's something America has to accept at some point. And Trump especially doesn't want to lose. He always wants to win. But China basically showed him they have leverage. And this is a competition, and I'm afraid in the good old world when China and the U.S. were teaming up and one was financing the other, are now going at each other. And there's an old saying, when elephants make love, the grass turns to suffer. And when they fight, the grass suffers too. And I'm afraid Europe could be the grass in that picture.
Well, I was thinking of the grass as just being individuals, and so I was wondering.
In the end, it's people who pay for with their lives for stupidity.
Yeah, and
of leaders.
I was wondering, to kind of bring it to Tocqueville and his sense, of the risk of soft despotism arising out of democracy, out of popular sovereignty, where people actually had agency and actually had some freedom in their lives. What would you say, what is an individual, a mere blade of grass, to do when these giants seem to control so much of our lives? What do we do?
Well, you still have elections. I say you still have elections. Some people are even afraid that may be gone pretty soon. So you can choose your leaders based on what you think is good for your country and the rest of the world.
The reassertion of the Republican principle. James Madison, Federalist 10.
Yeah, we're old enough to remember it.
You could kick the bums out.
Yeah, but that was the problem. I remember Newt Gingrich. We had a brown bag lunch at the Brookings Institution, and Newt Gingrich explained what he was doing. You know, it was Democrats holding power at that time, and so he basically pushed the tactics of blocking everything, so nothing would go. So we already had a government that wasn't functioning, so the bums would be kicked out. and that was his recipe. I mean, the guy didn't really solve problems or initiate legislation. He was an obstructor, and he was huge. Him and Rush Limbaugh outside, and those were the origins of polarization, blockade, and then you had the Clinton stuff, and Clinton outsmarted him. But it took a history professor from Georgia, Newt Gingrich. So you can read that in George Packer's book, The Unwinding. An amazing book. I mean, it tells stories about different Americans, about this guy and that guy, about important guys. And George Packer foresaw that this country is unwinding. And today Packer is afraid America would drift into an autocracy. And he says, no fooling. I mean, you would be a naive not to be afraid of that.
All right. Well, that's one note to end it on.
Well, on that happy note, give me another chance, Beth, to be more optimistic.
If you have something a bit more, I mean, you say we have agency through voting. That's, that is the basis of a constitutional republic and a democracy, so liberal democracy. So that is optimistic, I think. You just have to go out and exercise that.
And vote if you can vote. But then again, I mean, there are some rumors now, since America and China are huge competitors and may go at economic war again, and Russia is meddling with your elections, and Iran is now a conflict. Some people may decide, these are extraordinary circumstances, and this entitles the president to really call the shots for elections. I mean, your constitution says, well, that's states, and only Congress can do this and that. But if the SAFE Act doesn't go anywhere, they may threaten to really change the rules of the game. And Trump doesn't want to be a loser or a victim. He wants to win, and losing one chamber of Congress wouldn't be really good for him, because he would then not have a unified government. So I'm afraid you will see more of ICE, you see more police, and more people threatening away Latinos, even those who have legitimate documents, but who are afraid of police and this and that. So that's probably not the democracy Tocqueville saw and was so excited about and bring home the ideas. It could be that after 250 years, America may have reached a peak, and these adventures abroad have problems at home. We have seen that the Iraq War, global war on terror, also meant, civil liberties and checks and balance didn't function that well. So Mr. Rehnquist, late Supreme Court judge, wrote in a book, All the Laws But One, Civil Liberties in Wartime, that the Supreme Court is kind of hesitant to hold the commander-in-chief's, the president's hand, and Congress is sucking up anyway, even without wars. Or so, inter arma silent leges. When the weapons speak, the law is silent, and that's my worst case scenario. That an external fight would be used to stifle democracy at home. But I'm not optimistic. I try to be optimistic. So what's the optimistic scenario? Here Trump is already fighting against the rest of the world. Liberation Day April last year, declaring economic war to almost every country, even to islands where only penguins live. Only Russia was exempted from that. And that caused trouble at the stock market and also at the bond markets. And that's something Trump realizes. There's not much checking and balancing. Well, the Supreme Court woke up after a few months telling the president there is no external powers emergency and that, so you can't do the tariffs on that basis. So, but he will get around.
Yeah.
But the stock markets tanked, and not only the stock markets, people went out of the so-called safe harbor. They didn't want to invest any longer in American debt and in treasury bills, and they fled the dollar into gold. And also this Iran war could lead to the same. Inflation will be there. Strait of Hormuz is closed. Energy prices spike. Second-tier effect. Fertilizers, burgers will cost more than farming and all that. So you have inflation, and then you have a new minion of Trump at the Federal Reserve who will do what he wants and put down the interest rates. Inflation spikes more, and the rest of the world will say, that's it. The risk is too high. We don't finance America any longer, and you have a financial crisis. So after that crisis, maybe MAGA could be Gaga in some people's minds, and then they see what happens when you let children play with too big tools. And people may realize we may need a different team, but that's maybe just wishful thinking. Maybe Trump finds a scapegoat, as he's good at it, and it will be the Chinese, the Germans, and others who are guilty of that. Who knows? But we will have to watch it because it's important. It's about America. It's about a country I owe a lot to. So I'm really worried that this country that was so open, so hospital, isn't hospital any longer. I see students thrown out left and right, and in Germany, I cannot really advise students to go to the U.S. because they don't know whether they can stay the whole distance and all that. So this is on a personal level, for students here. Well, this drives home everywhere.
I'm Canadian, and I went to Notre Dame for graduate school in South Bend, Indiana, and that was my first real experience of the United States, and I really loved it. Had an amazing...
Drank the Kool-Aid.
Drank the Kool-Aid. Saw the F-16s fly over during a football game, and then you get kind of hooked after that. And
the guy told you, gal, that's the sound of freedom.
Exactly, yeah. And my mom actually, she did a master's degree in her 50s at St. Cloud, Minnesota.
St. Cloud, Minnesota.
St. Cloud, Minnesota, yeah. So we would drive from South Bend and stop at her apartment.
That's where I was, at St. Cloud, Minnesota.
And so we would stop at her apartment overnight, and then we'd go up to Winnipeg. Because she did a 2-year master's degree in piano performance, and she loved St. Cloud. She loved it.
Yeah.
She called it her Florida because it's much warmer than Winnipeg, 7 hours south. But that's a happy note, is that we have these personal connections to
we do,
America and to its flourishing, and that is really a lot of what America
and we will
is
overcome.
Yes.
I mean, Canadians are on the happier side. You may be the 51st state, and then you're home sweet home. I'm kidding.
And then Germany will be the... I don't think Germany will.
Let's talk geopolitics. I mean, you should become a member of the European Union. I mean, now we defended Greenland or Iceland, as Trump calls it. So now let's really make sure this is safe. Put the Canadians in because you do have a military and you do have resources.
We do have resources.
And so let's talk about that. So let's think bigger. I realized when I was up on the hill and we had a session in Ottawa. I mean, that felt familiar. I mean, that felt European. I mean, you don't have to go to Quebec to really get the French experience, but Canada is a lot more European than many European countries these days.
Interesting. All right.
So here's an offer. If they don't like you in the south, go east with the European Union. Yeah, well, west if you think is the other, or the pole up there. I mean, forget about east, west, over. Come over.
Come over.
When the penguins are fleeing and the ice is melting.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Tocqueville Talks. This episode was produced by Audrey Enghauser. Lucy Southwell provided administrative support. The theme music is called The Girl I Left Behind Me, a popular folk song in early 19th century America, here performed by Jacob Taylor Armerding. To learn more about our lecture series and events, our Tocqueville and Beaumont Fellows programs for undergraduates, and to listen to episodes, watch event recordings, or support our work, search on Google for the Tocqueville Center at Furman University. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, subscribe, comment, and share Tocqueville Talks on all your favorite listening services. And visit our YouTube channel for full recordings of past events and episodes. Until next time, goodbye.